Okay, so factoring when the A value is greater than 1, okay? I don't know if you can see that title, but that's what it is. So factoring when A is greater than 1, okay? So let's remind ourselves of what is our A, okay? Well, in our quadratic here, we have ax squared plus bx plus c, okay? So this is our A term, our B term, and our C term, okay? So, before in our original video, this A value here was just, a 1. So all we had to do was 1, 2, x, and then fill in these two spaces here for our two binomial and factored form. But not the case with when the A value is greater than 1. There are more steps, okay? So I'm going to walk you through this very slowly, and we'll do it together. So step 1, let's write this down. Step 1, multiply A times C and put it in the magic X, okay? So this is our A term, and this is our C term, okay? So I want you to go ahead and draw the arrow from the 5 to the 2 to remind yourself that this is step 1. We're going to fill in the magic X. So multiply the A term times the C term. So 5 times 2 is what? 10. So we're going to put that in our magic X. And the B term, okay, still goes down here, 11. So we ask ourselves, and then we fill in the rest of the magic X, okay? Same questions as before. What two numbers, when multiplied together, give you a positive 10, but when you add them together, gives you a positive 11? Okay, well, that's going to be 1 and 10. 1 times 10 is 10, and 1 plus 10 is 11, okay? So now that we have multiplied step 1, A times C, and filled in the rest of the magic X. Step 2, you're going to write the first term. You're going to take the first term and write it exactly the same way, okay? Then you're going to fill in 2 spaces here, and then take the last term and write it exactly the same way. We're trying to create 2 spaces here for our 2 numbers from the magic X, okay? Because we're trying to create our 2 binomials, okay, for the factored form. So go ahead and draw your squiggly down the center, okay? And what variable is in our quadratic X? So go ahead and put your two X's there. So now what we can do, now that we've set this up for success, step 2 would be fill in empties, okay? So here we have our 2 empties, all right, that we need to fill in with our 2 numbers from the magic X. So you have to ask yourself, okay, now the decision becomes, I just want to give you some foreshadowing. Step 3 is to factor out the GCF. So if we have to think in terms of greatest common factor, what number do you think would go where? Well, when I'm looking at this number and this number, well, 5 is a multiple of 10, okay? So I'm going to put the positive 10 here and the positive 1 here because I want to put multiples with each other. That just makes sense, okay? So step 3 is to factor out the GCF of these 2 binomials, okay? So we're going to put our line here and 1, 2, just like we did before when we pulled out our GCF in our former lesson. Pull out the GCF, okay? This is a skill we already know how to do. So when I say GCF, you know that this is what you're automatically doing, okay? So what do these 2 terms have in common? Well, they're both multiples of 5, and they both have the variable x, so we're going to put x there. What do both of these terms have in common? Well, I would say that that would be 1, okay? That's the GCF for both of those terms, all right? So here comes our question. 5x times what gives me 5x squared. Well, that's going to be x. Okay? So, again, we're still on step 3 where we're doing the GCF. Okay? And 5x times what gives me 10x? Well, that's going to be plus 2. Okay? And now let's fill in the leftovers here. 1 times what gives me 1x? That's going to be x. And 1 times what gives me a positive 2? Positive 2. So everybody write down step 4. Put it together. Put it together. What do I mean by putting it together? Okay? Our answer is going to have 2 binomials, right? What times what gave us the original 5x squared plus 11x plus 2? What times what gave us this? Okay? Well, I'm going to tell you how we're going to use what we have here to put it together. Okay? The first binomial is going to be from your 2 GCFs. So watch me do this. 1 and 2. Okay? I want you to draw the GCF and the GCF and bring those together. And our first binomial is going to be 5x plus 1. 5x and a positive 1. Okay? Now, the second binomial, 5x plus 1 times what gave us that original? Well, if you can see here, x plus 2 and x plus 2. It's usually always the case that these 2 binomials are identical, which is what we want. And we're going to bring those together, and that's exactly what goes in the second binomial, and this is our factored form. This is our answer. This times this gave us the original quadratic up there. This binomial times this binomial. This is the factored form of that. Okay? So, just to recap, okay? Step 1 was multiply A times C, put it in the magic X, and fill in the rest of the magic X. Step 2 was we had to write it, the first term exactly the same way, and the last term exactly the same way. And we had to create 2 spaces so that we could put our 2 magic X numbers, okay, terms in here, okay? Then step 3 was pulling out the GCF. You already know how to do GCF, okay? Pulling out the GCF, and then step 4 was putting it together, putting the 2 binomials together, the factored form, the 2 binomials that that when multiplied together would give you the original. We used the 2 GCFs and then the 2 binomials. So I want you to give it a try. And so I'm going to give you a practice example right now, and we will go over it in the video together. I'm just going to erase these numbers in the magic X so we can, use and reuse. Okay. The magic X. Okay. So let's see if, there it is. Let me just move it up. There it is. Okay. So there is your practice problem. And I'm going to do it in the video right now. Okay, so you just had some time to work on that yourself, and we're going to start with step 1. Step 1 is multiply A times C. A times C. So 6 times 5 is what? 30. Fill in the rest of the magic X. Our B term goes where? Here, 13. Okay, so what times what gives me 30? And, what 2 numbers, when multiplied together, gives me 30. But when you add those 2 numbers together, gives me 13. That would be 10 and 3. Okay, easy peasy. So what we're going to do now is we're going to fill in the empties. We're going to use these 2 numbers that we got in the magic X right away. So take the first term and write it exactly the same way. Create your 2 terms, and then write the last term exactly the same way. Put in your X's, and then draw your squiggly because we're creating our two binomials, okay? We're setting this up so that we can do step 3, which is what? Pull out our GCF, okay? So now let's look at what we have here, okay? Here's your clue, okay? It's decision time. Which 10 or 3, which number, okay, are you going to put here, okay? Are you going to put the 10 here or the 3 here or the 10 here or the 3 here? Well, I always say, rule of thumb, put multiples with each other. So try it out and let's put our 10 with our 5 and our positive 3 x with 3 with our 6 and go from there, okay? So step 3 is what? Pull out the GCF, okay? So let's do that. Draw your empties. Okay, so remember, this is your GCF here, you guys. I'm just going to write that there just as a reminder. So we already know how to do this skill of pulling out the GCF, right? So what do these two terms have in common? They're both multiples of 3, and they both have an x variable. So 3x is your GCF. So 3x times what gives me 6x squared? That's going to be 2x. And 3x times what gives me 3x? That's going to be plus 1. Okay? Now, what's the GCF here? Well, they're both multiples of 5. So that's the GCF. That's it. 5 is the GCF. So 5 times what gives me 10x? Well, that would be 2x. And then 5 times what is 5? That's a positive 1. Look, do these match? Yes, they do. Is that what we wanted? Yes, it is. Fabulous. Okay? So now, how do we put it together, right? How do we put it together? Well, let's do our two binomials here, you guys. And we know that what forms the first binomial here, okay? The two GCFs. Those come together and they form the first binomial. So we have 3x plus 5. And then, here we go, okay? They match and they form the second binomial. So we have 2x plus 1. And this is your factored form of that quadratic, of that polynomial, okay? And you just factored, this is the factored form of that, all right? Now remember, if you're unsure if you factored it properly, if you just do the FOIL and multiply it out, if you get what you started with, then you know you factored it correctly. Okay? That's factoring when the A value is greater than 1.